Near the beginning of the novel, there's a 15-year-old boy who's lying in hospital in the ICU in a coma, and he's fallen off his chapel tower at school. And what happens with the novel is it then starts to go backwards in time, and we go between the perspectives of the mother, the aunt, and the uncle, and we try and find out why he might have jumped. So the novel, in a way, is structured a bit like a murder mystery or psychological thriller. There's a story that's dramatic and exciting and compelling, but underneath that there are a lot of themes and issues that are being explored. It took me a while to come upon the title of the novel, and I was worried that it would sort of sound like a self-help book, the Book of Gifts. But I think that when you read the novel, you realize that it's got a lot of layers to it. Each chapter in the novel is given a heading, and that heading is a gift that one of the characters has either been given or has given to another character. And as the back of the book says, what is the cost of giving a gift? When you give something to someone, what you give up. And when you receive a gift, what you give up. You're now indebted to a person. There's a power dynamic going on in the giving and receiving of gifts. I always try to write books where there's something for everyone, where everyone can feel at home in the book. So I try not to shut people out. I try and write books that are with lots of different perspectives and lots of different voices and lots of different positions. And so I was trying to do that with this one, but I also wanted to feel like a murder mystery and a thriller and have that sort of element. Also, a lot of it is set at the Oyster Box Hotel in Umhlanga Rocks. I thought it would be quite fun to dwell in a place where most people don't have access to, and hang out there. We don't read books because we want to read likable characters. We don't read because it's nice, because the people are nice people. We read because they provoke different responses in us. I think if we read in order to go to places that our everyday lives don't necessarily make available to us. So often characters have to be provocative, they have to provoke responses in us, and so they have to have an edge to them. They can't just be nice and likable. They have to provoke a response. They have to provoke a response in other characters so that there can be a bit of dialogue and a bit of conflict. And you also want to write characters that go on a journey. So if a character starts off likable and nice, where are you going to take them? You're going to take them to be unlikable and not nice. So I'm much more interested in starting from a dark place or a difficult place and finding my way back to the light during the course of the novel. So there's a character called Marion X who has got a very absent mother, and she's sort of fixated on the loss of the mother in her life. And so what Andrew does to help her is he helps her to remind her of all the gifts that her mother did give her. A name, a body to live in, the gift of life, a pair of shoes whenever she needed a pair of shoes, thousands of meals whenever she needed to eat, piano lessons, swimming lessons. We give each other thousands of gifts without it almost noticing it. We sort of take it for granted. And we fixate sometimes on the one gift that wasn't given and give that importance over all the other things. And as a writer who's representing women, representing black characters, I'm very aware of how complicated that is and how fraught with misappropriations that can be. Which is really why I try to write novels where there's a lot of dialogue inside it, and certainly that a middle-class white male heterosexual perspective is spoken back at by other characters in the novel and displaced. And often my protagonists aren't middle-aged white men. There are other characters who I have to stretch myself into and who become the sites of dialogue and conflict and ambiguity. So I'm never trying to speak for a group or trying to represent in a full way what has historically been other from my, the body and circumstances I'm born into, which I have no choice over. But I really do try to write books that are about power and power relationships and the difficulty and the complexity of those things. Jennifer's quite a difficult character in the book because in a way she embodies what Freud called the death drive. And it's a highly problematic concept, but I think we all have people in our families sometimes who feel like they've got a kind of meanness of spirit, or they're kind of trying to ruin things all the time, or initially Jennifer's seen as this embodiment of the death drive, and then I think later we get to unpack her and sort of see why she acts like she does act. I think there are three things you need to think about when you write a book. One is content, so what story am I telling? The next is form, which is how am I telling it? And the third is context, who am I speaking to? What provocation do I want to send out into the world? And I always start with content. I always try and find what story it is that I'm trying to tell. I think one of the difficulties of writing a novel, particularly the first draft and particularly the beginning of the first draft, is that you're setting up you're setting up so much who your protagonist is, what the tone of it is, the texture of the language, because I always try to write with a slightly different kind of language with each novel. And when I was working on this, it was quite complicated, and I knew it had to go backwards because it's about trying to locate the cause of this dramatic event, the sort of elusive causality. And each time you go backwards, you go into a different perspective from a different character. It gets more and more complex. So it's sort of structured like a murder mystery, like a thriller, and we're trying to understand who kind of done it on some sort of fundamental level. So it had to go backwards, but it couldn't also just go backwards because I also wanted it to go forwards. So there are bits that go backwards and there are bits that go forwards, and there's one thread on the narrative that's really dark, so I had to have one thread of narrative that was really, really light and really beautiful and a really lovely place to be, as well as a difficult place to be. So the style of the novel it's got this kind of minimalism. It's a very stripped away. So there are a lot of psychoanalytic concepts that run through the novel, and I have no training in psychoanalysis, and it's a very complex and huge field, and I've never been to therapy for 5 minutes. I've never in my life been to therapy. I mean, I probably should have, but I never did, and I suppose I just became a writer instead. But it's written in such a way that if you do know about those psychoanalytic concepts, you'll be able to see how some of them are developed through the novel. But if you don't, it's not going to affect your reading of the novel at all. But I think as writers, what we do is we lie our way towards the truth. We try to create fictions that give the illusion of truth, that people go into this place of fiction and there are all sorts of connections with their own lives, and then they go back into their lives feeling more connected, feeling that something's been resolved, something's been understood. And that's really my motive all the time, is to give readers food for living, and to hopefully get them to live more open lives and more compassionate lives, both with themselves and with each other, so that we are enriching humanity in some sort of way.